Today on Locked On Red Wings, Petr Mrazek returns to Detroit in deadline acquisition, and the Detroit Red Wings lose their fifth straight game thanks to a horrendous third-period collapse.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's a host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a sports writer for C&G newspapers, while I am a color commentator for Oakland University ACHA D1 men's hockey. And we got a very jam-packed episode for you guys. Red Wings made one trade at the deadline, shipping out Joe Veleno for Craig Smith and Petr Mrazek, and then they proceeded to lose their fifth straight. Honestly, kind of a scheduled loss, but still not loving to. You don't love seeing how that game played out, especially in the third period. So we'll talk about all of that and kind of just probably have a little bit of a big picture conversation too, because it's hard not to, given the state of this team. Kind of doing this same song and dance 3 straight years. But before we get to that, I got to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, let's lead off with the trade, right? I think that's probably more interesting for the folks listening than talking about a third period collapse.
Chronological.
Loss. And chronological. Petr Mrazek returns to the Detroit Red Wings along with center Craig Smith for Joe Veleno. What are your thoughts on this trade? Kind of overall, but also like piece by piece, right?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think this makes a lot of sense for Chicago. This is two aging players on their roster, one of which is getting paid a decent amount. Neither is getting paid through the roof, but like Mrazek's contract isn't exactly nothing either. And they bring in a younger forward that really just hasn't gotten an opportunity he's gotten opportunities to flourish, but he hasn't flourished with his opportunities that he's been given. Presumably with the Blackhawks roster, he can get a bigger role there. Wishing Joey V nothing but the best. From the Wings perspective, it's weird because I do not think you're losing much in Veleno's production.
No.
Like you really aren't. That he had like 10 points in almost 60 games or something. Like he has done next to nothing on this season. So the loss of his production and giving him up in a trade does not bother me in the slightest. I have no issue with it. If another team thinks that, he has value, then absolutely find a way to make something happen. And when it comes to Smith, like you are getting an uptick in production, you're hopefully getting a little bit more defense from a forward position. That's all great. Like he's not getting paid very much. That's all awesome. I have no issue with that part of it either. It's a little bit of a hard buy type of move, even though it's the only move they made, which is kind of like weird to me a little bit, I guess. But like you did improve up the middle as well, which we've talked about is a huge area of need for this team. So I have zero issue with that. The confusion I have lies with the Mrazek reunion. It's funny. I almost wish we could have like recorded it, but you and I had a solid like half an hour phone call Friday
game, yeah.
After the game that they lost, and after obviously the trade deadline, and it's you had brought up a point where like you trade away Husso, you get his money off the books, and then you bring in Mrazek, who is also getting paid, not
similarly.
Right.
Similarly, cap hit wise, like
yeah.
I think Houston was like 4.75, and Mrazek is 4.25.
Right, and so you have you're bringing in now a goalie who has been like pretty objectively rough on the ice this year. He has not had a good season. He's another year older and aging, and the part that made the least amount of sense to me was, well, I guess two parts of it. One was the fact that Yzerman just came out and said, like, we're going to carry 3 goalies on the roster the rest of the year. Seems, I guess both of the two main ones have been struggling, but like Mrazek again is having a pretty brutal season. And then the other one was the fact that he mentioned that a selling point for bringing in Mrazek was the fact that he was under contract next year. And like, I understand that right now, like Lyon comes off the books and whatnot, and you might need somebody that's a little bit more solidified back there. But like, I don't know how you look at Mrazek's production and contract and think it's a good thing to have that under, in the books beyond this season. I don't know how that's a selling point. That makes zero sense to me, aside from just like having another NHL caliber body in the goalie room. Like that's the only thing that solves. I don't know, man. Like
this is a
only deal is wild. I don't think you got a lot worse. Like I don't think this is like, oh, you got a lot worse. I'm not going to miss Joe Veleno or his production, but like I don't know what this really solves, to be completely honest with you.
right. Like when I saw they traded away Joe Veleno, I was completely okay with that. Honestly, I felt it coming because he was pushed out of the lineup a lot when everybody was healthy, because more youth had come up and pushed him out. Same with Christian Fischer, so I wasn't surprised when he got waived. So I didn't mind trading him away to a team like Chicago, kind of perfect for Veleno, where he's going to get consistent ice time, giving him an opportunity to really solidify himself at the NHL level. My issue is with the Petr Mrazek acquisition. Just like it is with you, for a lot of the same reasons that you just said. And I agree on principle with Yzerman that they needed goaltending help. Like, that game Friday just re-upped. Like, okay, this goaltending room is falling apart, and you need an extra body in that room to, like, help create competition in the crease and kind of reinforce that. Because as of right now, on this 5-game losing streak, and honestly, with some of the wins that they had before the losing streak, goaltending was their biggest weakness. And it showed its ugly face again on Friday. But Petr Mrazek is not the solution. Like, as you put, you traded away an expiring terrible deal in Husso just to go out and get a very similar contract on an even worse goalie analytically as an .890 save percentage with Chicago. And some people are going to go, .890 save percentage with Chicago? Well, Chicago's bad. He has the 3rd worst goal saved above expected in the league. Husso is like 9th. The 3rd worst. He was getting healthied in favor of Arvid Soderblom in Chicago. Like, he last week was talking about how he'll support them and he's probably not going to play that much because obviously they acquired Spencer Knight. Like, this is a guy who could not win a goaltending battle in the Chicago Blackhawks locker room. That is saying a lot about his production right now. So I don't see how I understand there's another goalie in the room and he runs hot too. So I can get behind that in like he is going to be an extra body to compete for the crease and like it might push them all to be a little bit better, but how much better? Like, Mrazek as a goaltender is worse than Lyon and worse than Talbot on principle. So how is he going to make them better? And, and I'm all for Mrazek starting on Monday, Scotty, because Talbot and Lyon have been awful, and maybe with a new team, Mrazek has a little bit of a bump. I'm okay with it because it's a new look to us. Well, at least this time around. We've had him before, but it's a new look this time around.
Not really, but yeah.
Yeah, but you see where I'm going. It's just, I don't understand the extra. My theory is, and we did talk about this on our conversation on Friday, my theory is the whole reason he brought in Mrazek was just to have a goalie under contract next year so you don't just hand Kosa a spot. Because Yzerman's very big on not just gifting young players a spot.
That's not worth $4.25 million, man.
Yeah, I know. I agree. But we'll have a conversation. We're going to have a conversation about Yzerman. Not that we are like fire Yzerman, but it is time to talk about, treating him like a human being rather than like some saint. It's time to have that conversation. I don't know if we'll have time in this episode, but the pro scouting department has been an absolute disaster for this hockey team. And the only successful moves he has had pro scouting wise, and I mean, when I say success, I mean success, not this contract's kind of bad, but the player's kind of decent. were DeBrincat and Kane, who were kind of gifted to you. DeBrincat basically forced his way here, and Patrick Kane was recruited by DeBrincat. So, like, and I have my qualms with Patrick Kane, but at least on the power play, he delivers. So there's a conversation to be had. I'm not going to advocate for Yzerman to be fired, but I think it's time to treat him like a human being, and he's going to have a lot to do if this next offseason is going to be a big test for me, if whether or not on what side of this fence I'm going to live on with Yzerman for the rest of his tenure. But as far as Craig Smith goes, power play unit 2, maybe. He does provide 19. He's 35-year-old center. He'll probably be your everyday fourth-line center, I imagine. Maybe playing wing. It depends on what they do with Rasmussen here. But Kopp's out, so you needed another center. And if they want to keep Kasper on the wing, he gives you an option down the middle. He will give you more depth offense marginally over Veleno. It's an upgrade, but like in the smallest sense. It's an expiring deal. So like that, it's pretty like whatever. He might give you a little bit more offense on the bottom end, but he doesn't give you much defense, to be honest. I looked at his numbers, and defensively, but again, Blackhawks. This is a guy who had 4 or 5 20-plus goal seasons in his career, but he's 35 years old. He's out of his prime. If he gets you 2 or 3 goals here from now to the end of the year, that's a success, I guess. It's pretty big nothing. The Mrazek situation is mind-boggling to me because I just don't see how, besides from the aspect that it's another person in the locker room to compete for the crease, as a player, I don't see how he is an upgrade for this team right now. I don't see how it reinforces the issue or reinforces that goaltending crease that's been so poor. I don't get it.
Yeah, we've been talking about how goaltending, and we'll talk about it later this episode, has like single-handedly been losing you games lately. I'm not sure how bringing in a player with that level of production on the year fixes that. And now he's under contract for next year too, which is not a good thing. And we got to go to a break. When we come back, I guess I'll continue on because I have more to say yet. Still very passionate about this deadline and the direction of this team. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Lockdown Red Wings. Gonna talk to you today about our friends over at Wonderful Pistachios. If you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, you can crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein and giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, as I always say, I love the no shells variety. Perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk, I'm on a road trip, or I just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite as well. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Continue the conversation here about the trade deadline. So another thing I agree on principle with, we like to say here on this podcast, in a vacuum, right? In a vacuum, I can understand, despite the tweet that I have since deleted because I was being overly emotional at the time, despite my tweet where I'm like, I'm glad Yzerman sat on his hands, I do agree in principle, like the cost to acquire a rental this trade deadline was astronomical. So I agree, like, not shelling out the assets that were required. Like Beauvillier went for a second-round pick, and Beauvillier is not that good. So I understand in principle not shelling out a ton to get a rental for this team for where it's at. But my problem therein lies that, okay, why is this team not ready? We are in year 6 of Steve Yzerman's tenure as general manager, and we have had a lot of good things to say about him. The amateur scouting has been phenomenal. A lot of the draft picks are now with the team, and they're performing well. And part of the struggles with young players is they're young players, right? But the veterans on this team that were acquired via free agency have, at best, been just okay, and at worst have been absolute disasters, i.e. Justin Holl, Eric Gustafsson, Vladimir Tarasenko. And this was a year where you reinvested in your head coach going into the year, let go a lot of depth offense to try and make the team better defensively, which we were optimistic would happen marginally. Did not happen. It was a complete disaster. You had to fire your head coach. So now you have a new head coach in here who's trying to make it work with less than they had last year. And like some of it, right, I don't think they're going to sign Gostisbehere because Gostisbehere was going to command a lot of money. You had to re-sign Raymond and Sider. I understand that's all a big part of it too, is like these players have opinions on what they want and where they're going to go to. But so when I hear Yzerman talk about that, I'm like, yes, you're correct. And you're probably objectively right not to shell out the kind of assets it would have taken to get a rental. But also, this team's not ready to do that because this is the team that you have built. The acquisitions you have made in the free agency have been lackluster for the most part and unimpactful. Like JT Compher, despite how much we talked about last year, how he had a successful season, nowhere. Cop, production-wise, has been nowhere to be found, although I think defensively he's been okay. He's one of those players who's in my category who's been just okay. Justin Holl has been a disaster. Tarasenko, Gustafsson have been a disaster. Sherratt's been just okay at best. So it's like, yeah, this team's not ready to buy at the deadline because the team you built is not ready, which is why I think it's okay to have this conversation about the direction this team's going, because at the same time, Scotty, the market is the market. And last year we didn't acquire anyone in the offseason that of any impact because Yzerman did not want to pay what a lot of these guys were going for. Like, and Chandler Stevenson, right? Like 7-year deal. That's max you can get on the free agent market. I get guys like that. But guys like Matt Roy, who I was a huge proponent for, may have been a huge upgrade on this blue line. And then, like, I don't even want to get into the Woolman situation and the asset management, but it's just, I think it's okay to start having a conversation about if this team's going to get over the hump, if we continue to be afraid to spend. And I also think that with this team the way it is, you need to have an impactful offseason this year. Because if you do not, and we trot out there with mostly the same roster, with the same players, you're going to be in the same position next year. I think this next offseason for Yzerman, Scotty, is going to have to be and might be his last chance to make an impact on this roster. Not last chance as he's going to get fired, but last chance to win the trust of this fan base. Because I think a lot of people are rightfully frustrated and getting fed up with the kind of just stuck in the middle. It's time to either leverage the assets that you have acquired, right? Because there's more than one way to spend your assets. You can not every draft pick has to make the NHL. So you can trade some picks, you can trade prospects to acquire an impact player through trade or spend money in free agency. And I think this offseason he has to acquire by either leveraging those assets or signing a big player to make an impact on this roster to push this team forward. Because if he does not, I think people would be well within their rights to say, is Yzerman the guy for the job?
Yeah, something that really frustrates me about how the last few like trade deadlines and off seasons have gone in that regard is the constant, not doing nearly as much as expected, and then the front office relaying the same message, which is the prices were too high and the prices were too expensive, right? That's been something we have talked about pretty much every trade deadline and every free agency for like 2 to 3 years now. And the reason that frustrates me is because if you are sitting around and waiting for a really good value deal to come along, like eventually, if prices keep going up and the prices for certain assets and certain players keep going up, then eventually that's just the price for things.
Right.
So eventually that just becomes the cost of things. Like it's this notion that it's like, oh, well, 7 years ago, like this player was worth this, or a trade could have happened for this and whatnot. Like that's not how it works. Like this is, as we say again, in a vacuum, its own year, and like at some point, the cost for a certain level of production is just the cost for that certain level of production, and it's no longer, oh wow, they overpaid, or oh wow, like that's way more than I thought. At some point, it just is what it is, man. And like I think it's very frustrating to see teams like Ottawa and other teams that are in this similar tier of like just standings wise, like similar tier of point total on the year, be willing to make those, moves and be willing to spend a little bit to bring in top end talent. I think it's a ridiculous notion that, top end players with really high production, those players are too expensive. So we are not going to go after those players, and we are going to go after the Alex Cobbs and JT Compers. And like, that's not me like calling them out personally, obviously. You could, again, point to pretty much any, Ben Sherrod, like the list goes on. Like, you can point to pretty much any free agent acquisition this team has made over the last couple of years. But like, why on earth does it make more sense to overpay for those guys than it does to quote unquote overpay for top end talent? You are objectively losing value by doing that. You're not saving money. It looks like it on paper because the literal dollar sign is less, but the production's way less. It makes no sense to, if that is truly just the new bar and the new cost of high-end production, then guess what, man? That's just the new cost of high-end production. And that's the price you have to pay to bring it in. And it's really tiring and frustrating to just continuously bring in lesser talent to quote-unquote save money when instead you're really just significantly losing value of what, dollar per point or whatever metric you want to use is objectively worse because you chose to go that route. That's really like where I stand on this whole thing. Like this is another deadline where you stood pretty quiet. They didn't do a whole lot. And now we're just basically hoping that anybody can play goalie for this team the rest of the season. And that's going to be the only difference of, whether they make the playoffs or not. It's just going to be if they get any semblance of production in net. And I don't think Petr Mrazek's going to change the production they've already gotten.
So two things on that, right? Like, you're talking about how that market is what the market is, and people are getting paid more on the free agent market, probably more than they deserve, admittedly. But like, that is the cost to acquire this talent. Two, that's only going to get worse with the cap surging. Like, with the cap jumping $10 million this year, then $10 million next year.
Right. Then it is no longer more than they deserve, is my point. That's just the price for stuff. Like this isn't like a mind-boggling concept. Like if you play the percentage of how much they're worth to the cap, then like, you know what I mean? It's no longer an overpay. It's no longer worth more or getting paid more than you're worth. That's just the new price. And you have to move on and accept that.
I'm also getting tired too of hearing, because we heard it in the offseason, we heard it here at the trade deadline, that we were in on players and we just couldn't get them. It's like, okay, cool. I appreciate that you're kicking the tires and trying to get these guys, but clearly your offers are not competitive enough. If you keep
that just
missing
means someone was willing to outbid you. Yeah.
Big name that Red Wings were in and missed on was Carlo, right? Went from Boston to Toronto. He would have been a pretty good acquisition for the Red Wings.
Yeah.
But we weren't willing to pay what it cost. And I don't know, man. I agree in principle this deadline. I just want to reiterate before we go to our final break and then talk about the fifth straight loss. I just want to reiterate. I agree in principle not to spend through the nose on this team for rentals. We talked about that, and I'm standing firm on that stance. But again, it just comes back to when you take a step back and it's like, why was this team not ready for you to make that kind of change? And that was because your team and your asset management, with at least your pro scouting, has acquired 2-3 straight years talent that does not contribute to this team. We were talking about on Friday, Scotty, how getting rid of Gustafsson and Tarasenko would have made this team better by subtraction because they've been so bad on the ice. Like, that's where we're at right now with some of this pro scouting, is these guys are actively hurting this team by coughing the puck up every single time they're along the boards, or just getting beat on the outside, or the puck going off your skate. Like, it's just, the pro scouting has been a major problem. And if there's not a major acquisition made this offseason via trade or free agency, I'm going to be seriously questioning the direction of this team, because we cannot get stuck in the middle. We don't want to be the Minnesotas and the Carolinas of the 2010s.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's the worst place to be in sports. For a decade, the Pistons proved that too. I think it is. I can agree with, not mortgaging the entire future for one trade deadline for, rentals for 1 year. The team is obviously not in position to do something like that. I do like there were plenty of non-rentals moved at this deadline. Like
Carson Sosi went for a 3rd-round pick.
Dude, yeah, like there were plenty of opportunities to improve your team with players that would be here beyond this season. They chose Petr Mrazek to fill that void. Like that is mind-boggling. So I can agree with like the rental side of it specifically, but like all of your competition in the middle is paying big prices, quote unquote, to bring in talent and to help get over the hump. And they're, bringing in guys that are going to be here beyond this year. At some point, that's just the cost of living, man.
Yep. We're going to do a late 3rd break here and then come back and talk about the loss to Washington. So stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Looking to optimize nutrition this year, Factor makes eating well with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to eat. And heat and eat in just 2 minutes. It's so easy. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle. With whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. You're going to love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Oh, it's a mouthful. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right, Scotty. So before the game, Red Wings put Mazur on IR, which is not a surprise considering that we know for a fact he dislocated his elbow. It's probably gone. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I would struggle to see him come back this season, just given how much time is left in the year. If this was like in October, he'd probably be back in like December, but it is what it is. They recalled Shine, which I loved. Honestly, I kind of would have preferred Watson at this point just because they need a little bit more edge. Shine does have an edge, though, and he did fight Tom Wilson, which I loved. So the Shine story continues. It's a great story, but unfortunately, that's really where the good feelings end because the Red Wings lost their legs by the second period, and the third period was an absolute atrocity to the game of hockey.
Yeah, man. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. I don't even know if there's too much analysis for this game. It's
goaltending
just like
sucked.
The goaltending was awful, man. Like that's where you're at, and we've known that the goaltending has been struggling lately, and the team's decision was to bring in, analytically one of the worst goalies in hockey, which circles back to the point that we've been making this whole episode. So like. This was something we talked about with Talbot early in the year was, this is awesome. This is fantastic level of production that he's been giving us, the first 3-4 months of the season. And but given his age and where he's at in his career, how long was that going to be able to last? Well, it looks like about, a month after that conversation. And it's really fallen off a cliff here in the last, 4-ish weeks. So
Lyon allowed 4 goals on 19 shots on Thursday, and then Talbot allows 5 goals on 28 shots in this game. So goaltending's bad. There's only 1 goal in this game that I will say, like, I will defend Talbot on, and that's the Radish goal where he made like back-to-back saves, and the same guy was able to hammer it home because somebody, again, missed an assignment, which is another thing that's plaguing this team is just missed assignments or causing easy goals. But the rest of them, protest, shorthanded. I thought Sider played it poorly. I think he got beat on the outside, but that shot came from like the top of the circle. It didn't come from in tight, and Talbot got beat clean. Chychrun, shot, beat clean. Protas again, shot, beat clean. Tom Wilson, another shorthanded goal, breakaway.
Not even on good angles, man. Like they're
like far side bar,
like pushed to the outside. Like it's not like these are high danger, like they're pushed to the outside with a defender next to them. Like just simple wristers. Yeah, man. Like really, really rough performance, obviously, and like it's. I don't know what else you do.
It just absolutely. I mean, they had in the first minute and a half of the third period, they went from having a 2-1 lead to down 3-2.
Yeah,
they just absolutely collapsed. And goaltending is a big part of it, but you can't allow shorthanded goals the way that they are either. They allowed 2 shorthanded goals that game. I don't know, man. It was nice to see Larkin score. That's back-to-back games he potted a goal, so he's kind of getting off that streak. Raymond has been nowhere to be found basically since Four Nations, which is, if this team's going to succeed, they need Raymond to succeed, so hopefully he can get off of his slump here soon. But, I mean, it's not going to get any easier. So here's the thing, is after that game, Scotty, I talked to you, I talked to my buddy Jim, I talked to my buddy Kenny, I talked to my buddy John. I made a gauntlet of calls because I was in my feelings, right? I was crashing out publicly on Twitter. So I am through the grieving process. I am at the acceptance. I'm at a point now where, I'm not expecting this team to make the playoffs. It's kind of like me insulating myself, trying to protect myself from pain that I endured last year. But they are still presented with an opportunity to really close that gap on the wild card against Ottawa on Monday. But on the flip side, if you lose to Ottawa, because of course Ottawa and New York went to overtime on Saturday, so they both got a point and widened that gap. Ottawa ended up winning. If you lose to Ottawa, you put yourself in such a hole. 6-game losing streak, that would put you, 5 points back of Ottawa with 18 games left to play. As we get closer to the end of the season, every game gets more massive for standings implications. And I think this is your final game against Ottawa this season. And it's probably, to this point in the season, is the biggest game you're going to play. Of course, again, increasing magnitude as we get closer, but a game against a team in your division, in the wild card that you're competing with. You just lost back-to-backs against Columbus. You gotta get a win here if you want to keep your hopes realistically alive. Because 5 points back is easy, a 3 or 4 game win streak on one end and a 4 game losing streak on the other. Yeah, you could get back in there, but you make your life a hell of a lot easier by winning this game. Because every point matters from here on out. Again, not expecting them to make the playoffs, but they're still technically in it.
Yeah. I think I don't know. There's still a decent amount of time left. I think
you play them again on the 27th, by the way. So 2 more games against Ottawa.
I think to your point, I mean, I kind of said this down the stretch for the Tigers last year as well. It's like every game you play then just becomes the most important game of the season so far. Like legitimately,
yeah, you said that a lot last year. Yeah,
and so I think that's kind of where the Wings are at, and yeah, you gotta rise to the occasion, brother. I wouldn't say I'm super optimistic about them making the postseason. I'm not sure.
Get that insulation on. Protect yourself.
Right, high likelihood, but I'm also, there's still a lot of hockey left. I'm not ready to just be I'm frustrated with the deadline. I'm frustrated with the losing streak. They're, definitely not gonna do anything. They win on Monday, and we have a whole new outlook maybe on the future of the season. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, certainly a rough last couple of weeks, man.
So what's cool about tomorrow's game, though? You can see it on Fox too.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I got to talk about that with Tigers too.
Yeah, 5 games towards coming into the end of the season here. The Red Wings are going to be
step one of a. I don't know anything, but I think that's step one of a bigger picture thing that's probably coming in the next calendar year.
They did that last year too at the end of the season. I remember the last 4 or 5 games, but this is preemptive. It's earlier in the season. It is only 5 games. It's March 10th against Ottawa, March 27th against Ottawa.
5 games in a month, though, right? I mean,
yeah, in a calendar month, yeah. All going to be broadcasted on Fox 2 and FanDuel Sports Network. I'm going to tell you personally, I'll be watching on Fox 2 because you can get that via digital antenna, and there's way less of a delay watching it live than there is watching it on a stream. So I can get the updates a little bit. I won't get it spoiled by the Red Wings Twitter account.
I literally have a special like do not disturb setting that only mutes Twitter notifications that I turn on every Tigers and Red Wings game and then turn off when the game ends so that it's not ruined.
Yeah, every single time the Red Wings go to overtime, I like chuck my phone across the room because I'm like, I don't want to get spoiled on how this ends. Anyway, Scotty, that about does it. Yeah, I think we effectively covered our thoughts.
Yeah, no, a lot of people are frustrated. I think rightfully so, and if they want any chance of saving the season, they gotta, probably get some points here in the next few games to.
Usually help.
Yeah, to bring that back into the picture. So, we'll see what happens, man.
One way or another, Scotty, we ball.
We do ball.
And we as a people, you listeners, you ball. Thanks for tuning in every single day. We appreciate
as a society ball.
Yep. So we'll be back tomorrow with a new episode recapping the game against the Ottawa Senators. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.